Welcome to this deep dive into Canada in 2025.
Yeah.
We've got some pretty interesting sources lined up. We've got political analysis, some editorial cartoons, and even a personal story from someone we're calling James, a Canadian, who recently moved back after years in Hong Kong.
Interesting.
And the goal is to uncover what life is really like in Canada right now, beyond the headlines, and see how it all connects back to you.
I think what makes this deep dive so interesting is we're going beyond just the surface level. We're actually weaving in different perspectives to really understand not just what's happening, but why it matters.
Okay, so let's start with the political landscape.
Okay.
This analysis we have from David Coletto suggests that Canadians are feeling this underlying sense of scarcity and uncertainty right now. The economy and healthcare are top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it seems like that old promise of a stable, predictable future is kind of fading.
It's like, what happened to the Canada we thought we knew?
Right.
And this anxiety, I think, is fueling these political divides.
Yeah.
And we're seeing regional differences become even more pronounced. You know, think about Alberta and Saskatchewan pushing back against those federal climate policies, while Atlantic Canada is really struggling with housing affordability.
And then there's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The U.S., the re-election of Donald Trump has definitely added to that unease.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to trade and international relations.
Yeah, it feels like a giant question mark hanging over everything.
Right. It's just this like instability and unpredictability.
Trump, right.
Yeah.
Like his unpredictable nature is a wild card, and Canadians are, understandably, concerned about the ripple effects of a more protectionist America.
So with all this uncertainty swirling around, how are Canadians reacting politically?
Well, Coletto suggests that people are really looking for leaders who offer stability and competence more than just sticking to a rigid ideology.
It's like they're saying, just fix things.
Yeah. Right. They just want things to work.
Yeah.
And I think this pragmatism could lead to some surprising shifts in voter behavior in the upcoming 2025 elections.
Oh, okay.
Coletto even suggests that younger voters might be more open to supporting conservative leaders or those who really prioritize practical solutions over traditional party lines.
Wow, that's a real curveball. I wouldn't have expected that.
It could be a huge departure from what we've seen in the past.
Speaking of practical concerns, let's dive into the economic challenges Canadians are facing in 2025.
Okay.
Our sources point to inflation as a major worry, along with those rising interest rates and the looming possibility of a recession.
Right.
Plus, the Canadian dollar is weakening.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes those imported goods pricier.
Yeah, and this is hitting Canadians right where it hurts. Their wallets.
Right.
Think about your weekly grocery runs. Reports from CTV News actually indicate that the average family could be spending an extra $800 on groceries this year.
Wow.
Compared to just a few years ago.
Ouch, that's a lot of money.
That's a serious dent in anyone's budget.
It makes you wonder how people are making ends meet.
Yeah.
On top of that, Ontario seems to be hit particularly hard with an economic downturn.
Yes.
And job losses in the auto sector are pushing those unemployment rates up.
Sadly, we're also seeing a rise in personal bankruptcies across Canada.
Really?
Particularly in Ontario and British Columbia, and this is likely due to a combination of factors, including those high housing costs we mentioned earlier and the weight of mortgage debt.
Yeah.
It paints a pretty stark picture of the financial strain many Canadians are under.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the image of Canada as a land of opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we always hear about Canada's high quality of life.
Right.
But it seems like cracks are starting to show.
That's where I think James's personal story becomes so valuable.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian citizen who moved back from Hong Kong with his family, and his experience really highlights the disconnect between the perception of Canada and the realities on the ground. You know, he went in with certain expectations, and things haven't quite turned out as he envisioned.
For instance, he specifically mentions the healthcare system as a major pain point.
Yeah.
He talks about the long wait times his family faced for specialized care for his son, forcing them to turn to private treatment.
And that's expensive.
Which, as you can imagine, is incredibly expensive.
And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Unlike in the U.S., those private healthcare costs aren't even tax deductible in Canada.
Oh, wow.
So not only are you paying out of pocket for essential care,
Right.
but you're not even getting a break on your taxes.
Yeah.
It really challenges the notion of Canada's healthcare system being truly comprehensive and accessible.
Yeah, that's a huge reality check.
Yeah.
I've always heard great things about Canadian healthcare.
Right.
But this really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
What other surprises did James encounter?
Well, he also brought up the hefty tax burden in Canada.
Okay.
Which really surprised him. He was taken aback by how much of his income goes towards various taxes, from sales tax to income tax and everything in between.
Really?
It seems like the cost of living, combined with the high taxes, makes it really difficult to get ahead financially, especially for newcomers who might not be prepared for it.
That's a side of Canada we don't often hear about.
Right.
It makes you wonder if the Canadian dream comes with a hefty price tag.
Yeah.
And speaking of hefty prices, let's talk about housing.
Okay.
It's no secret that Canada's in the middle of a housing crisis, with prices skyrocketing and home ownership becoming increasingly out of reach for many, especially in cities like Toronto and Vancouver.
James paints a really vivid picture of this struggle. He talks about how the real estate market, fueled by factors like mass immigration and investment, has become incredibly competitive, making it nearly impossible for many Canadians, even those returning from abroad, to afford a place to call their own.
And it's not just about buying a home, right?
No.
Renters are also feeling the squeeze, with rising rents adding to the overall cost of living crisis.
Absolutely.
James even pointed out the lack of what's called missing middle housing options, things like duplexes and townhouses that could help bridge the affordability gap.
That's an important point. The lack of diverse housing options further limits choices and makes things even tougher for people across all income levels.
It's not just a problem for low-income earners.
Right.
It's impacting the middle class as well.
Absolutely.
So we've got a political landscape in flux, a struggling economy, a housing crisis, and a healthcare system that's facing some serious challenges. Where does immigration fit into all of this?
Well, that's a great question.
Canada has always been known for its welcoming stance towards immigrants.
Yes.
But it seems like there are some growing pains associated with this.
You're right, and this is where the conversation gets really nuanced. Our sources indicate that Canada has seen a significant influx of immigrants in recent years, which has undoubtedly contributed to both economic growth and challenges.
It's almost like a double-edged sword.
Right.
It's not as simple as saying immigration is good or bad. There are complex factors at play.
Exactly. On the one hand, immigration has helped boost Canada's population and economy.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's also put a strain on infrastructure, particularly housing. And this has led to some social tensions, with some Canadians expressing concerns about the pace and scale of immigration.
It's interesting that the Canadian government is actually planning to reduce immigration targets in the coming years, potentially impacting GDP growth.
Right.
Some argue this is a necessary step to address some of these challenges, while others worry it will hurt the economy in the long run. It's a tough balancing act.
It really is. And this is where the perspective of YouTube commentator Jack Chappell comes in.
Right.
He links immigration to broader questions of Canadian identity and cultural change, arguing that the influx of newcomers is leading to a shift in Canada's cultural makeup, which is creating anxieties for some, particularly those who feel like traditional Canadian values are being eroded.
It's a perspective that resonates with a segment of the population.
Absolutely.
Particularly those who might feel left behind or uncertain about these changes.
Yeah.
And it seems like this cultural anxiety is also playing out in the political sphere, with a rise in support for more populist and conservative leaders like Pierre Poilievre, who often appeal to those who feel disillusioned with the status quo.
Coleto's analysis suggests that this trend is particularly noticeable among younger men, who seem less attached to traditional liberal values and more receptive to conservative messaging that focuses on economic opportunity and a sense of belonging.
Interesting.
It's a complex and evolving situation, but one thing is clear. Canada is at a crossroads, facing a confluence of challenges that are testing its reputation as a beacon of stability, prosperity, and opportunity.
And to really understand the depth of these challenges, we need to look at how Canadians themselves are processing them. That's where the satirical lens of Graham McKay's editorial cartoons comes in.
Okay.
His work offers a sharp and often humorous take on Canada's political and social landscape, poking fun at everything from homelessness and healthcare access to climate policies and leadership struggles.
McKay's cartoons are like a funhouse mirror reflection of reality. They exaggerate certain features, but they do it in a way that makes you laugh while also prompting you to think, there's some truth to that.
Exactly.
Great.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to society and saying, take a look at yourselves.
Yes.
And sometimes that reflection can be pretty uncomfortable.
One cartoon that really struck me was from December 2023.
Okay.
It depicts homeless Canadians shivering in the cold while Trudeau, Ford, and city councils are all warm and cozy indoors.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty stark critique of the political inaction on the homelessness crisis, and it serves as a powerful reminder that these macro trends we've been discussing, like housing affordability and economic hardship, have very real consequences for people's lives.
It's a sobering image that forces us to confront the human cost of these issues.
Right.
And McKay doesn't shy away from other sensitive topics either.
No, he doesn't.
There's a cartoon from January 2024 that tackles the expansion of medical assistance in dying, MAID for mental illness. It highlights the irony of MAID becoming more accessible,
Right.
while wait lists for mental health care, primary care, and social housing remain incredibly long.
It's a dark joke, but it raises important questions about the priorities of Canada's healthcare system and whether it's truly focused on providing care and support or simply offering a quick exit for those struggling.
Yeah, it's a question that deserves serious consideration.
Right.
Especially in light of the dissatisfaction with the healthcare system that we saw in Coleto's analysis and James's personal experience.
Absolutely.
McKay also takes aim at Canada's political leaders.
Yeah.
In one cartoon, he portrays Pierre Poilievre pandering to populist sentiments on transgender policies, leaving rubber marks on vulnerable youth in the process.
It's a powerful image that suggests political opportunism can have real consequences for marginalized groups, a reminder that words matter and can have a tangible impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And then there's the cartoon depicting Trudeau struggling with the decision of whether to stay in office or step down, reflecting the political uncertainty and leadership challenges facing the country.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the one showing Canada's reluctance to increase defense spending despite pressure from NATO.
Right.
These cartoons, taken together, paint a picture of a Canada that is grappling with internal divisions, economic woes, and a shifting global landscape.
It's like Canada is trying to find its footing in a world that's increasingly uncertain and complex.
And it seems like these challenges are also impacting how Canadians view themselves and their place in the world.
Right.
Coleto's analysis highlighted a generational divide in how people consume information and form opinions.
Yeah.
Younger Canadians are far more likely to rely on social media platforms like TikTok for news and information, which means they're exposed to a very different set of narratives and perspectives compared to older Canadians who still rely on traditional media sources.
This creates a fragmented information ecosystem where different generations were almost living in separate realities, making it difficult to have a cohesive national conversation or find common ground on important issues.
It's like everyone's speaking a different language.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating, albeit concerning, trend. So where do we go from here?
Well,
how are these interconnected trends going to shape Canada's future? And what role can you play in this evolving landscape?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and to delve deeper into those, we need to hear more from James about his experiences as a newcomer to Canada and explore some of the deeper systemic issues at play.
Right.
But that's a conversation for part 2 of our deep dive.
I can't wait to hear more.
Yeah.
So be sure to join us for the next part of our exploration of Canada in 2025.
Yes.
It's a journey you won't want to miss.
Definitely not. It's going to be a good one.
All right, see you then.
See ya.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Canada in 2025. Before we jump back into the complex realities facing Canadians today, let's shift gears for a moment and explore the personal experiences of James the Canadian, who returned from Hong Kong with his family.
Remember, he chose Canada based on its global reputation for quality of life, affordable healthcare, and stability. But once they settled in, he encountered a different set of challenges that really highlight the gap between perception and reality.
Right, and one of the areas where this gap was most apparent was the healthcare system. James talked about the long wait times his family experienced when his son needed specialized care.
Imagine having to wait months for your child to get the medical attention they need. That was the reality James and his family faced, and it forced them to make some tough financial decisions.
It really puts a human face on the statistics and reports we often hear about long wait times in the Canadian healthcare system. It's one thing to read about it, but it's quite another to experience it firsthand.
Absolutely. And this raises some serious questions about the sustainability of Canada's publicly funded healthcare system As the population ages and we see a growing shortage of healthcare workers, how will the system cope with the increasing demand and rising costs?
It's a question that's on the minds of many Canadians, and I imagine it will be a key issue in upcoming elections. But healthcare wasn't the only area where James felt the pinch.
He also expressed frustration with the high tax burden in Canada, which really surprised him. He found that a significant chunk of his income was going towards various taxes, making it difficult to save for the future.
Wow, I hadn't realized the tax burden was that high. What are some unexpected taxes that people might not be aware of?
Well, in addition to the usual income tax, there are sales taxes, property taxes, and even a carbon tax in some provinces. All of these add up, and for newcomers like James, it can be a bit of a shock.
It definitely challenges the romanticized view of Canada that many people have. The high cost of living, combined with the heavy tax burden, creates a real financial squeeze for a lot of Canadians, especially those who are new to the country.
And then, of course, there's the housing crisis, which we touched on earlier.
Jen described the challenges of navigating a real estate market where prices are sky high, making homeownership a distant dream for many.
He painted a vivid picture of bidding wars properties selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking price and a general sense of desperation among buyers.
It sounds incredibly stressful, especially for families who are just trying to find a stable place to live.
And it's not just buying a home that's a problem. Renters are also feeling the squeeze with rising rents, making it increasingly difficult to find affordable housing.
Right, and James pointed out that even finding a rental property can be a huge challenge with long waiting lists and intense competition.
He mentioned that he felt like he was constantly up against younger people, single professionals, and even students, all vying for the same limited pool of rental units.
It makes you wonder if the Canadian dream is starting to feel out of reach for many people, whether it's homeownership, affordable health care, or simply making ends meet.
It's a valid concern. And while immigration has certainly contributed to Canada's economic growth, it's also added to the pressures on housing and other social services.
You know, it's interesting to hear different perspectives on immigration. While some, like Jack Chappell, argue that it's contributing to a loss of Canadian identity, others see it as a vital source of diversity and economic vitality.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But it's a conversation that we need to have openly and honestly, acknowledging both the benefits and the challenges of immigration.
Absolutely. And as we navigate these complexities, it's helpful to step back and look at how Canadians themselves are processing and responding to these challenges.
That's where the satirical lens of Graham McKay's editorial cartoons comes in.
Right. His cartoons offer a unique and often humorous perspective on the issues facing Canada. They can be biting, thought-provoking, and even a little uncomfortable at times.
But they force us to confront the realities of these situations, and they often spark important conversations.
For example, one of McKay's cartoons depicts Canada as a patient lying on a therapy couch, struggling with anxieties about the economy, the environment, and political polarization.
It's a humorous way of highlighting the collective unease that many Canadians are feeling.
And there's another cartoon that shows a group of Canadians huddled around a campfire singing Kumbaya while surrounded by forest fires, flooding and melting glaciers.
It's a satirical commentary on the disconnect between Canada's self-image as a peaceful and environmentally conscious nation and the realities of climate change.
It's like he's saying, look, we can't just sing our way out of this problem.
Exactly. And while these cartoons are meant to be humorous, they also carry a serious message.
They remind us that we need to engage with these issues, have difficult conversations, and work towards solutions.
And this brings us back to the question of what role you can play in shaping Canada's future.
Right, because it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all these challenges and to think that there's nothing we can do as individuals.
But the reality is that we all have a role to play, whether it's staying informed about the issues, engaging in constructive dialogue, or advocating for change in our communities.
And sometimes simply acknowledging the complexities and challenges facing Canada is a good first step.
It's about recognizing that there isn't always a simple solution and that finding common ground requires empathy, understanding, and a willingness to listen to different perspectives.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored so far. The political shifts, the economic anxieties, the personal experiences of James, and the satirical lens through which some Canadians are viewing their nation.
We've covered a lot of ground, and it's clear that Canada is facing a unique set of challenges in 2025.
But it's also a nation with a strong history of resilience, innovation, and compassion.
And it's that spirit that will ultimately guide Canada through these turbulent times.
I agree. And in our final part, we'll explore how these challenges are shaping Canada's identity, its values, and its future. So stay tuned because this deep dive isn't over yet.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Canada in 2025. We've covered a lot of ground, from the political and economic anxieties gripping the nation to the personal experiences of Canadians trying to navigate these turbulent times.
And through it all, one question keeps coming back to me. Is Canada really living up to its reputation as a beacon of stability, prosperity, and opportunity?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to really grapple with it, I think we need to delve deeper into some of the systemic issues that are at play.
One of the most pressing issues is the housing crisis, which we've discussed at length. It's not just about affordability. It's about the lack of diverse housing options, the impact of foreign investment, and the role of government policies.
Right. And it's not a problem that's going to disappear overnight. It requires a multifaceted approach that addresses both the supply and demand side of the equation. Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the housing crisis has ripple effects throughout society. It impacts people's mental health, their financial well-being, and their overall sense of security.
It's like a domino effect. When housing becomes unstable, everything else starts to crumble.
And then there's the healthcare system, which is also facing significant challenges.
James's story really brought those challenges to life for me. Imagine having to wait months for your child to get the medical attention they need. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And it raises questions about the long-term sustainability of Canada's publicly funded healthcare system. Can it continue to provide universal coverage while also keeping up with the rising costs of healthcare and the growing demands of an aging population?
It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
But one thing is clear, we need to have an honest conversation about the future of healthcare in Canada, and we need to explore innovative solutions.
Perhaps we can learn from other countries that have successfully implemented different models of healthcare delivery.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but there's a lot we can learn from each other.
And then there's the issue of the generational divide, which is becoming increasingly apparent in Canada.
Coletto's analysis highlighted how younger Canadians are getting their news and information from different sources than older generations. This creates a fragmented information ecosystem, which can make it difficult to have meaningful conversations and find common ground.
It's like we're living in different worlds with different sets of facts and perspectives.
And this divide extends beyond just how we consume information. It also affects how we view the world, our values, and our priorities.
For example, younger Canadians are more likely to be concerned about climate change, social justice, and mental health, while older generations may be more focused on economic stability, national security, and traditional values.
And these differences can lead to misunderstandings, tension, and even conflict.
So how do we bridge this generational divide? How do we find common ground and build a more cohesive society?
It starts with communication, listening to each other, and trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
It's about recognizing that we all want what's best for Canada, even if we have different ideas about how to get there.
And it's about finding ways to work together, despite our differences, to create a future that benefits everyone.
You know, throughout this deep dive, we've explored some pretty heavy topics. But I don't want to leave you feeling discouraged.
Me neither. Because despite the challenges, there's still so much to be hopeful about.
Canada is still a country with immense potential, a diverse and vibrant population, and a strong commitment to social justice.
And it's up to all of us to shape the future of this nation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a few thoughts.
Please do.
First, stay informed. Engage with the issues that matter to you. Read, listen, and learn from a variety of sources.
That's so important. We can't afford to be complacent or uninformed.
Second, have those difficult conversations. Don't shy away from engaging with people who have different perspectives. Challenge your own assumptions and be open to learning from others.
Those conversations can be uncomfortable, but they're essential for building understanding and finding common ground.
And finally, don't underestimate the power of your own actions. Every vote you cast, every conversation you have, every choice you make contributes to shaping the future of Canada.
It's true. We all have a role to play in building a more just equitable and sustainable society.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Canada in 2025. We hope it's given you a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing this nation and inspired you to get involved in shaping its future.
It's been a pleasure exploring these complex issues with you.
And remember, the future of Canada is in our hands.